Hello, everyone. I'm Carla Shepard-Rubinger, the Executive Director of the Rosalind Franklin Society, and thrilled to welcome you to another terrific session of our year-end conference. With several incredible new appointments in Washington, we are thrilled to highlight these impressive new leaders. Dr. Renee Wegrzyn, Director of ARPA-H, Dr. Namandje Bumpass, Chief Scientist at the FDA, where she provides strategic leadership and expertise to support scientific excellence, innovation, collaboration, and capacity to achieve FDA's public health mission. Prior to this, Dr. Bumpass was on the faculty of Johns Hopkins for 12 years, most recently as professor and chair in the Department of Pharmacology and Molecular Sciences. She also previously was an associate dean for basic research. She received her BA from Occidental College in 2003, a PhD in pharmacology at the University of Michigan in 2007, and completed postdoctoral fellowships at Scripps in La Jolla. Dr. Bumpass currently serves as president-elect of the American Society of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics, and she previously served as chair of the NIH Xenobiotic and Nutrient Disposition and Action Study Section. She has way too many honors for me to review all of them, but I hope you'll check them out on our website. Note, though, that she is an elected fellow of the American Association of Advancement of Science, AAAS, and a member of the National Academy of Medicine. We also welcome Dr. Renee Wegrzyn, who serves as the first director of the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, ARPA-H, appointed just recently in October 2022 by President Biden. Previously, Dr. Wegrzyn was a vice president of business development at Ginkgo Bioworks. Wegrzyn comes to ARPA-H with experience working for over a decade at DARPA, for those 5 years as a program manager with a $250 million portfolio. At DARPA, she leveraged the tools of synthetic biology and gene editing to enhance biosecurity, support the domestic bioeconomy, and thwart biothreats. She received a Public Service Medal for her work and contributions at DARPA. Before joining DARPA, she led teams in the private industry across a range of specialties, including biosecurity and gene therapies. She served as the scientific advisor on the Scientific Advisory Board of the National Academy's Standing Committee on Biotechnology Capabilities and National Security Needs. She received her BA from Georgia Institute of Technology, was a fellow at the Center for Health Security Engineering Leaders and Biosecurity Initiatives, and completed a postdoctoral training as an Alexander von Humboldt Fellow in Heidelberg, Germany. So you can see we have a terrific amount of experience to share with you, and that is what we're hoping we will be able to get to in a short time with each of you. So before we launch into your new positions in Washington, we need to know how you got here. Can you each tell us a little bit about your journey to this point? Why don't we start with you, Renee?
Yeah, so this is week 7 for me at ARPA-H. So most of my career has been before coming here. I do think for the context of the Rosalind Franklin Society, I do want to talk about a really formative thing growing up. Was my mother was a Polish immigrant, and from a very early age, she told me all about Marie Curie and the great work that she did as a scientist. And, immigrant 2-time Nobel Prize winner, that was the bar that my mom set for me early on. But what was important to me about that experience was in my career, as I kind of matured as a scientist, really, I went through a lot of male dominated universities. So Georgia Tech was mostly male. I worked with the Department of Defense, again, mostly male. But that experience early on, I think I always entered into those situations just assuming I could lead it, and was never intimidated by that setting. And so I'm very grateful to my mother for that. But really did, traditional, I'd say PhD postdoc, but got very interested in the applied side of things and moved to industry, and had worked in a small company where the CEO had been a program manager at DARPA, and started to describe this place that it seemed magical to me, that program managers could come in with their idea. They weren't directed what the program had to be by the organization. They brought those ideas with them. And then they were incredibly well resourced with a burning fuse to address that challenge. And so I went there first as an advisor, and then as a program manager where I managed 4 different programs. And that's really what gave me the spark to serve in the public domain as a scientist. Went to industry for a few years at Ginkgo Bioworks to really help leverage the bleeding edge of biotechnology and lean into public-private partnerships, which I think are underutilized by both government and industry right now. So when the call came from the White House to come to ARPA-H, I just jumped at the chance to be able to try to create an organization to really spark and push forward more of that public-private partnership. So I'll stop there. I'd love to hear from Namandje as well.
Well, Namandje, you had a great career too, and ending up at the FDA is quite a spot to be. But how did you get there? And along the way, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start really early on, just like Renee did. So I was born in Philadelphia. My dad was a professional boxer. And so, boxing is a big part of kind of culture in Philadelphia. So that's really what brought him there. And so, where I was born. And I grew up in that world where after he retired, he opened his own gym in Massachusetts and trained lots of fighters. And so for me, I really got inspired seeing that teaching. My mom was also an aide with kids with special needs in elementary school. So they both had this kind of educational teaching aspect. And so I was always drawn to that and thought that I would do something along those lines. At the same time, when I was growing up, my parents would always say, they wouldn't ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? They would say, what are you going to contribute to the world when you grow up? And I would think about that deeply. And I really loved science. I had gotten chemistry set as one of the earliest gifts I remember as a kid and worked through the experiments. So when they asked me that question of, how will you contribute to the world when you grow up? It seemed natural to me there would be something through science. So I wrote a letter to the American Chemical Society and said, what do scientists do? And they sent me back lots of information. I was hooked. So, no one in my family had ever graduated from college. So it wasn't that I was following, some path, but I had a lot of encouragement and support, especially from a family with this still education, teaching, service focus. So that really was my start. And so I went, to graduate school, postdoc, of course, as you mentioned, and went for an academic position because I really did want to work to advance the careers of others, work in an educational setting. So at Hopkins, I was there for 12 years. I led a research laboratory. I'm a molecular and translational pharmacologist. So I do everything from kind of, studies in a test tube, trying to understand mechanisms of how drugs work up through clinical studies. And my work primarily was on trying to understand how our bodies process medicines and why different people respond differently to medicines. And we focus specifically on HIV treatment and prevention. And a big reason for that is because of that service aspect that's always been part of me, where social justice and health equity are really at the core of the lens through which I view science in my life. So working on HIV gave me a way to serve the communities that I lived and worked in. I worked in Baltimore, I live in Washington, D.C. So to serve those communities, through something that really acutely impacts those communities, through my science. So we had that focus. In addition, I took on leadership roles. So I was chair of the department of pharmacology at Hopkins. I was associate dean for basic research. And I was, prior to that, one of the graduate student education deans and a dean focused on inclusivity. And through those roles collectively, I really became aware, and what I'd always known, that it really brings me a lot of joy to try to stimulate and facilitate the success of others. And doing that in a scientific context is really my life's work. So when this opportunity came to be chief scientist at FDA and do just that, with the wonderful scientists we have here, it was something that I felt was just a perfect fit. So I look forward to continuing along this path. But what really drives me is service through science.
I'm curious where each of you got your greatest support. We know it's never easy going through the path of choosing a field and an institution and each level that you've gone through, but where did you find your greatest support for continuing in a career in science?
I've been lucky enough to work with teams that really supported and enhanced each other and helped us level up. And so when I was considering taking this role, it was really my current team at Ginkgo, which kind of surprised me. They were eager for me to go and take on this role, which I was like, hey, okay, don't let the door hit me on the way out. But I think just the opportunity, as Namandje said, to serve through science is such an important thing to do if you're called to that service. And it's great when you have that support structure behind you, whether it's the team that you're leading, and of course my family as well, which is really important. So taking on a directorship, it's not an individual decision. So I have to definitely call out to my husband and my kids, and we made this decision together because I'm not at pickup in the morning at school. I'm not at pickup at the end of the day. My husband's kind of taken the rein there, and that's been a really important part of this decision too. So non-scientific support, but just as important.
Yeah. And Namandje, where did your greatest support come from? It's not easy going there. So the support along the way is critical.
So I think along the path, first for me, it started at home. My parents, they really made it impossible for me to believe there was anything I couldn't do. So it just seemed inevitable that if I could dream it, I could figure out a way to do it and I could get there. And I think that's very important, especially when you're, coming from a background where you're not surrounded necessarily by people that have, done the thing you're trying to do, having that belief in yourself. But I think along the way, I was lucky to find mentors who just were encouraging. So my graduate advisor, I still talk to him all the time. He's always been supportive, still helps me think through when I'm at a fork in the road. So I think at each step, same thing with my postdoc advisor, my dean from Hopkins. So identifying people who would give feedback and will give you criticism when you need it, tell you when you're, a little bit off or where you need to improve, challenge you, but also support you and really believe this is something you can do. I think that finding that team of mentors is key. There's a lot of discouragement when you walk this path. And I think certainly for women, particularly can be a lot of discouragement, but identifying people who will be supportive while at the same time challenging you, I think is key. And you just kind of, roll with that.
Yeah. In addition to that rosy picture of support for each of you, what were the biggest roadblocks you faced? And I'm curious whether you think there were different challenges to your male colleagues along the way, or is it common roadblocks across the board? Are there any that were unique for you? And obviously for women and minorities?
Mm-hmm.
You want to go first this time?
Sure. At every step, and I've written about this in the scientific literature. I think at every step there have been people who have challenged my ability, challenged my place in science, really based upon identity in many ways. So, I remember as early as elementary school telling a teacher I wanted to be a scientist and having her kind of laugh, girls like you don't become scientists. In high school, I was taking, advanced classes and still had a teacher tell me that girls like me don't go to college. That's just not what we do when you come from my community. So there was lots of that, and it followed each step. You'll never make it to academia. There's always you'll never be able to do. And a lot of it's based on bias. So what I've always said is it's hard, definitely. And it's hard to hear, but I try not to. And I basically, as a policy, I don't internalize other people's opinions about what I can and can't do. They don't know me. I know me. And so whether it's someone telling me only 11% of people make it to a certain spot, or, oh, you can't do it because, I say, you don't know me, I know me. I don't know who the 89% that couldn't do it were, or whatever it is. So I just don't internalize, and I focus on, where I want to go, and really embrace and lean into the people that I know will have, constructive critiques and help me get to the next step.
It's great. What, for each of you, what was or is the most exciting research you've worked on to date?
One of the most rewarding things to me was when I was at, I'll give you actually two examples. One is at DARPA, when I really could clearly see some of the challenges facing the gene editing and therapeutics community, and wanted to move forward and create a safer path towards those technologies that industry could adopt. And as a program manager, the most nerve-wracking day is the day that your proposal portal closes and you're, please, I hope I have the top talent in the country proposing to this work. And that was really rewarding to see that what the team and I had built, just really the top talent across the country had agreed with and wanted to be a part of a team that would advance the state of the art there. So that was something I was really, really proud of. And also, I guess, per your last question, when you hear the naysayers that say you can't do it and you're not going to be able to bring the top talent together, when you prove them wrong, that is just incredibly gratifying. I'll say it just makes you want to work that much harder and the team work that much harder. So that was a kind of a scientific peak for me. And then just personally during the pandemic, having left government and went to the private sector to help scale testing early days of the pandemic to non-traditional settings. So K-12 schools, working very closely with Baltimore City schools early on, helping them get schools back open with a testing program. And then over time, figuring out how to deliver that testing to airports and track the first cases of BA2 and BA3, Omicron variants as they came into the country. This is where I just saw that timeline from, scientific innovation to delivery of public health. You could see in real time the impact that the work that our whole team at Ginkgo Bioworks had been working. When you see that in real life, that was also just made you feel really good about being a part of science.
I think for me, there's a lot to think back on, certainly over the 12 years I had my own lab, but I'll highlight one thing that was very recent. We've been working on detecting and identifying proteins in single human cells. So this is really exciting. Very few people in the world can do this. And we were able to push this method in a way that we could see over 1,000 proteins in a single cell. But what was really cool was that we could put them, cells, cancer cells in a petri dish, for instance, culture them, treat them with a drug, and see that different cells responded differently based on those protein signatures. So it starts to give us some idea about a heterogeneity, that there's an individual difference in cellular response potentially that we can leverage maybe we're thinking about precision medicine. So we're really excited to advance that. And I'm looking forward to seeing, where that field goes. But I think that single cell biology is certainly part of the next frontier of science.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And as you said, the applications in precision medicine are just wide open and waiting for the two of you, I think. Mm-hmm. Looking ahead, what is your vision for these new positions, new agencies where you have great options? What's the vision you have in front of you that you could share with us?
Well, in part for me, it's for people to know that we do science at FDA. So I think that there are a lot of people that don't realize we have research labs and we have brilliant scientists who are doing work that underpins our, mission and our regulatory decision making. There are lots of things that we are uniquely poised and positioned to do. And we have, great innovators, great folks doing that work. And it's everything from, students and fellows in training, all the way through very senior investigators who are, noted in their field. So I want to raise the awareness in the public of the work that we do and really how excellent it is, and that the FDA, we are very scientific in our thinking and our decision making. I also want to increase our collaborations and partnerships. And I think it's something definitely that, Renee and I will be talking about. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to partner with other agencies and just other entities to try to advance science and see how we can stimulate discovery in various areas of public health.
No, I think that's an exciting vision for you. And Renee, you have a brand new agency, obviously incredible experience. A really important agency. Give us a sense of the vision you've inherited in terms of creating the agency and your leadership for it.
Yeah, I think in terms of what I inherited, I think it's the enthusiasm of the federal government who wanted to create this organization and sees this moment in time where an ARPA for health, the time is now, and we can really start to bring those very well-defined problems in health to this agency. They've given us $1 billion to start to try to fund the program managers to demonstrate the art of what's possible. And so, really my top priority right now, again, seventh week on the job, is to recruit that top program manager talent to bring in those challenges that they want to address. Our mission is to accelerate better health outcomes for everyone. And so we really mean that. We want, all a diversity of program managers, but also a diversity of topics to come into the agency for us to fund and move forward. So we're very excited to get started on that. And I hope some of the folks listening today would be excited and would consider becoming a program manager and bringing their really tough program in health that they want to pursue to the agency.
It is a really exciting opportunity. And I agree with so many people listening from so many places around the world. There are tremendous opportunities in actually both of your agency, but ARPA being brand new and FDA being so important worldwide always is really critical. How has the experience that each of you have had across sectors helped where you now sit in the government? So across academia, across industry, and now in government, has that helped to show options and opportunities? One of the themes of our work at the Rosalind Franklin Society is to show women and underrepresented minorities that they have options, a lot of options, and government is certainly an important one, but both of you have had incredible experience in all three. And has that helped you? Did you need all three? Does one need all three? What would your advice be to all those young people listening?
Well, I'm still missing the industry piece. I've got academia and government. I haven't worked in that third sector, beyond like an internship as a grad student. But I think one thing to realize is that a lot of what you do in any of these arenas is very translatable and transferable to the next. So certainly my experience, bringing a research project from start to finish, the leadership skills that you build running a research laboratory, working with people from, students and staff to other faculty, those interpersonal skills, I think that translates well to any workplace, certainly. Also, embracing leadership opportunities. When opportunities came presented, I always thought it was important to give it a try. And I think when you do that, you learn a lot about yourself, what you like, what you're good at, you grow. And that certainly, I think, helped to prepare me for being in this position now. I'm using a lot of those same skills, even though it's a different setting.
Following up a little bit about the FDA, Namandje, you have a very impressive male boss. The head of the FDA has a lot of FDA experience. And I know how supportive he has been to women and minorities in the research sector, whether it's the private sector or government or nonprofits. What's your sense of his leadership and the leadership at the FDA for both recruiting women and minorities, but also supporting them and retaining them, which is critical? What's turnover like at the FDA?
Well, I'll say, having Dr. Califf as our commissioner is certainly a major reason that I'm here. I was in a great position and very, very happy, and a department chair and endowed professor, with a wonderful department and lab, but the opportunity to work at FDA, forward our mission, but also with a leader that I knew had really similar kind of values scientifically and just generally was something that I had to seize. So there certainly is a commitment to diversifying our workforce, diversifying the team. With me being in, a role where I'm working directly with him, and we have many women that are on our executive team. I think that an important piece here is that all voices are heard. I think that everyone is given the opportunity to really speak. And everyone is given the opportunity to really, I think, express themselves. And even if you have an opinion that's very different, I feel that it's really heard. So there's a lot of healthy discourse here. And I think that it's, a culture that he's really fostered.
it appears that way from the outside. So getting that view from the inside is really important. So Renee, one of the questions for you, for people who know Ginkgo Bioworks and what an incredible startup that was, how big a leap was it from something like that to DARPA and a $250 million budget and the work you're doing now? How big a leap was that? It seems phenomenal to me, but it clearly made sense to you and works.
We talk about the different levers in science and innovation, whether it's government, industry, or academia. And I've spent time in all three. And what I've really appreciated in shaping my career is each time I've spent time in any one of those sectors, I've learned a little bit that in my next role has made me better at that role. And so, for example, going from DARPA, the government, where I had negotiated a lot of contracts with the private sector, then being on the private sector side of things, I am like, okay, now I understand why they're, pushing so much back on intellectual property and their licensing agreements and what they're allowed to do. And so now being back in the government side, I think I feel better prepared in helping shape a really compelling program to work with the private sector, because I understand that from both sides now. And so for me, it didn't feel like that much of a leap. There's certainly, big differences, but it's also, you bring the best of your experiences with you. And when I was at Ginkgo, I was actually part of a small team called Concentric by Ginkgo that we built out from, a couple dozen people to a couple hundred people by the time I left in 2 short years. I'm basically going to do that again here at ARPA-H, where we're starting with a very small team and growing quickly. And there's some lessons learned and efficiencies, really thinking about bringing in some almost more traditional industry perspective, like a chief operating officer, et cetera. Those are roles that I think we're going to need to succeed and do things differently. And so I do hope it's a manifestation of the best of all of those parts of industry, academia, and government that we can bring forward here.
It's terrific. Are any of the thoughts that you have presented for us today things you want to highlight, particularly for young scientists following in your footsteps? Are there any warnings you want to give or encouragement in particular aspects of moving your career forward and up and creatively?
I think one thing that I've always told folks is, really lead with your science. I think that diving into your science, if you're a graduate student or a postdoc, really focusing yourself, immersing yourself, being the world expert, that's important. And it helps to propel you. You get opportunities through doing that. You'll be presenting your work. People get to hear you, for instance. Opportunities come your way. So I've always led with my science. I have all of these things, leadership, et cetera, but I've always let science really be the center. I think in addition, as I mentioned, if you have a place that you want to get, I think really focusing on that and identifying people who are going to be honest with you. But as opposed to saying you can't do it, they'll say, this is how we're going to do it. This is what you want to do. These are the skills you need. These are the people you need to meet. This is, the paper you need to publish, whatever it is. People that are going to help you get to where you need to go, and really not internalizing or focusing on the people who will always be there who are going to say, oh, you can't do it. I mean, that's just not useful.
That's great advice. Then Renee?
Yeah, I think just to highlight something that was just said, not internalizing the naysayers is I think something that was very hard for me to do early on in my career, but I feel like it's a superpower now that if I had listened to every naysayer, I'd be in trouble now. And so really just want to emphasize that point. From the science perspective, when you think about things like equity and inclusion, I do think it's an important lesson that is a drumbeat I always, push on, which is you can't build it in the back end of the science you've developed. You need to take a little bit of time at the front end, especially something like a program at ARPA-H, and think about, okay, is this going to be, a very expensive gene therapy that you're going to end up with? Okay, how can we redesign the program so that the end product is something that is more attainable and accessible and is relevant for more individuals? And so that is something that I think it's not perfect yet, but we need to figure out how we do that. And the way that you do it is you have to believe that science is a full contact sport with a lot of different players, and making sure that early on I'm engaging our teams with FDA so that they're ready to regulate it on the back end of a program, and that we're working with health economists that, we design programs that can reach the greatest number of communities. That's a really important lesson. It's not natural for everybody to engage all those players and collaborate, but I think can be a real kind of level up for somebody that is trying to succeed in science.
Well, that's great. The two of you have done a perfect closing on this discussion for what we hope to communicate to people listening. And that is that women and minorities have options. And I remember when I was in graduate school, my advisor was appalled that I did not want to go into a university to teach and do research. I wanted something more applied. I wanted to work, ended up working with a foundation, but I wanted to do program development that could directly help public health and science. And he was appalled. And I think a lot of academics need to learn how much science, how much of what we can learn in the academic world is applied through government, through private agencies, through industry. And Ginkgo is a great example of that. I love the women who founded it. It started out as an idea and has grown, as you said. And the same thing with you, Namandje. You can start in certain areas in the academic world, and it leads to many, many opportunities in public health, public service. And although you haven't worked in industry, clearly FDA works very, very closely with private industry. So your relationship and your ability to work with private industry and the federal government is really important for all of us. So thank you both so much. And we clearly should all thank all of you in government service and what you do for us. And thank you for participating in this panel.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.